All right, all set up, streaming in 3 places: Instagram. Uh, hey Cherry, what's up? Instagram, Facebook, and what's the other one? YouTube. So today I'm just gonna talk about web-safe fonts. One of my good friends, Barack, is a phenomenal developer and an inspiration for me. Told me to do something on fonts. Tell the people what they need to know about fonts when you're making a decision on what font to use in your website. You're making a big decision, and this video is going to be about why you should use system fonts or web-safe fonts. But I'm not totally against using custom fonts where you have to like import them, but this video is going to specifically talk about some of the huge advantages of using fonts, what we call web-safe fonts. There are basically 4 reasons that I've kind of distilled down. I'm going to tell you all of them, and then I'm going to go through them one by one. First off, web-safe fonts always work. They always look good. They're always faster than the non-web-safe fonts, and they're much more accessible both in language and just for people with special needs. Okay, so the first one of those, web-safe fonts always work. Now this is a no-brainer. If you're using a custom imported font, whether it's Google Fonts or Typekit or something that you have the actual files for, and you're calling on them in your in your PHP or HTML, I guess. If you're doing that, to be frank, like there's a lot of reasons why it might not work. There might be a firewall. Maybe somebody has an old browser. Maybe somebody has like a crappy computer looking at it, some weird phone. Some people turn off non-web safe fonts because of accessibility reasons. So I'm trying not to intersperse into the other categories, but for the most part, if you use a web safe font, what you see is what you get. Furthermore, if you're heavily involved in like branding and you're trying to like really brand everything out, in email, you can't really use non-web safe fonts. It's tricky, but general practice in email is to use web safe fonts. So if you're a brand that relies heavily on your typography, you have to go in knowing that if you're going to do email marketing, you're not going to be able to keep that same level of brand cohesion because it's not going to work. Non-web safe fonts do not work in emails. Done a lot of emails, done some that were up into the 6-digit range, for an email, and even at that level, even at the most costly, expensive, high budget level of like designing custom email templates, you still use system fonts pretty much. So something to think about. So that's my first reason. Web-based fonts always work. Number 2, web-safe fonts always look good. Now, I'm pretty much an Apple user, but I've kind of recently became a little bit more of a Windows guy, and I would always check my websites on both platforms. But for the most part, the browsers on Windows will pixelate the custom fonts. So if you import like a custom font file, like a Typekit file or a Google Fonts file, depending on your browser, you'll have a much more pixelated looking font. A lot of designers will freak out about this when they hand their content to the developer because they'll be like, this isn't, what I gave you. This isn't how it looks in Photoshop. That's something a dev will hear a lot. And you're like, well, I mean, this isn't Photoshop, it's Internet Explorer. You know, it's a different thing. You're trying to have a file size that's under 2 megs, not 400. So, you know, it's a different set of rules you're going by. And as a dev, I try to catch that on the front end, but you know, that type of thing is an issue where if you're a web designer or like a graphic designer and you're designing for a website and you give somebody like a layout of what the site's going to look like, um, pretty much if you use like web safe fonts, Arial, Helvetica, Times New Roman, you will get exactly what you asked for. Okay, and we're still talking about fonts and the way they look, and I want to kind of tell you another thing is that the system fonts are actually very attractive. Uh, Helvetica is a beautiful font. Don't listen to what people say if people tell you it's generic. Times New Roman is a freaking gorgeous font. It's very refined. It's very timeless. It works. As a designer, I would kind of push you to get your expression kind of outside the realms of typography. I mean, typography is very important, but if you're a good designer, you should be able to design with any typeface that's like solid. And Helvetica, Arial, Times New Roman, they're solid. Georgia, even Bodoni, which is kind of a semi-system font, like these are solid fonts and they're good. And if you can't make a solid design with these fonts, I think it's time to go back to the drawing board and kind of think about, you know, what drives your designs and maybe if there's an opportunity to increase your vocabulary there. Okay, so I gave you the first two reasons. One, compatibility, they always work. Two, they always look good. Okay, reason number three is that they're fast. Fast, sorry, not trying to flip you off. But web-safe fonts are super fast. We're in a time where mobile dominates the world. These old desktop pages are only about a fraction of your viewership. You need your pages to be freaking fast because people are looking at them in the jungle with 1 bar of service on like a 1G connection, if that's even a thing. But all I'm saying is that a lot of people have slow phones and they're going to want to access your website. And if you want them to be able to read what you're writing, a system font is just going to load a lot faster. And that's just the reality of it. So if you are choosing like a stylized font, that extra 2 megs that have to load, I mean, not all typefaces are that big. It varies, but you know, it could be like anywhere between 500K to 2 megs, and then sky's the limit. That extra resource that has to load will kind of slow your site down. Furthermore, if depending on the way your site's set up, if that loads later, then what happens is they'll see like a system font, whatever the default is for your browser, usually Helvetica, and then it'll switch about a second in after it loads the thing, after it loads the font file, and that actually can kind of be a negative experience with branding, something that you might want to watch out for. So that's the number 3 reason fonts are fast. So far, system fonts always work, system fonts look good, and system fonts are fast. Web-safe fonts look good, web-safe fonts always work, and web-safe fonts are fast. Okay, the 4th reason is accessibility. For those of you who have heard me talk at various conferences and I don't know, stuff like that, conferences and like expos, one thing that I talk a lot about is accessibility for people with special needs. And also, I try to make things accessible for people of different competencies and different languages. When you're dealing with an issue like this, and you're talking about typefaces, as far as the ones that are the most consistently accessible are going to be system fonts pretty much across the board. Now, let me give you an example. Maybe you're dealing with like an old guy who has poor vision and he can't see what's on the screen. Like Grandpa can't see that well. So in his browser, he made all the fonts like 10 times bigger. Now, if you're using a system font, they scale very well and they're very identifiable at that big size. And they're very readable and it works. With the non system font, that the consistency and that experience is compromised a bit. Furthermore, people are used to reading the web safe fonts, so they know what they say. So if you are using some fancy font, especially when you get into like the Gothic and the Old English type of stuff, and it gets into calligraphy, some people just straightforwardly won't be able to read them, especially if you're dealing with somebody who is reading in a language that, you know, is not their first language, and they may not be as competent in that language. So it's something to think about. In the internet, you want to make your pages available to the most amount of people as possible, make it so that the value that you have in your site is kind of translatable to the most people possible. And speaking of translation, languages are huge. Now, Google Translator, for example, is becoming much more prominent. It's built into Chrome and a couple other browsers, so that's something to think about. If you're using a typeface that doesn't translate well to other languages, you know, that could be an issue. Like if, for example, you download off of like fontsquirrel.com some random kind of niche font and it doesn't have the proper pronunciation or punctuation marks for Spanish, that could legitimately be an issue. That could be a potential client, a potential connection to your content that won't be reached because you were insistent on that font. So basically, in short, that fourth reason is accessibility for like special needs and for languages. So you want your stuff to be able to be read by different people. All right, I think that's about all I got for today. Please like and subscribe. I will be off. I'm gonna try to post a video tomorrow. No promises. Let me know what you guys would like to know about in web design. I pretty much know everything there is to know. to know. So that's about it. It's been a blast doing this. I hope some of you learned a thing or two, and if you didn't, tell me what you want to know, and I will do it. All right, brah. Let me turn this bugger off. Aloha.